Good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Robbins. You'll see me as Brian on the computer, but I go by my middle name, Keith, so that's how I'll sign everything, and so that you know who I am now that you have the face to the name. Uh, in this week's assignment, we're looking at Western Civ and how it's relevant to today. I know we can all think back on to our undergrad experience when we had to take those big survey Western Civ classes with fellow history students and non-history students. And a lot of the non-history students are wondering, well, why are we here? Why do we have to take this course? I'm not interested in history. But I think we would all agree that it's important to take those courses because Western Civ provides us an understanding on why we're here and where we came from as a civilization. And but it's also important for us to understand that that perspective changes and the content changes over time. I know it certainly has in the 30 plus years since I graduated as an undergrad. So I decided to look at three articles that look on this subject from three very different angles. One is by Eugene Weber. It's a chapter that he wrote called Western Civilizations. It's in the book Imagined Histories. And Weber takes a look at the teaching of Western Civ as a course in the college setting in about the last 100 plus years, when it really first started back in the early 1900s as a course to be taught in higher education. And along with that, he looks at all the articles, or not the articles, excuse me, but the textbooks that go along with that education and how that has changed based on the themes that in the theme of thought, if you will, over the decades since this has started. And this is really important in today because here we are in the early 21st century. And when you look at what was being taught just in the last decade of the 20th century, it's changed quite a bit. So textbooks and the changing of the textbooks in context is important. The next article is by David Gress. It's called The Drama of Modern Western Identity in the journal The Independent Review. And he talks about how Western Civ is, in a more modern era, is looked at in the view of posts, postmodernism, post-revisionism, post this, post that. Basically looking at if we take this context and we look at it in that perspective, everything's already been done. So what's left to be done and what's left to teach for the future? So this is an interesting look. And one of the things that he notes here in the end is that this is a misleading interpretation of today. The grand narrative of the West grew out of an era that was making the uneasy transition from thinking of itself as civilization to one in which the West was merely one of several civilizations. And I think that's increasingly important today in the 21st century, where civilizations and countries and cultures are connected in so many ways, especially with the internet and the high speed internet being spread around the world, that literally everybody almost can access things much quicker. Now, with that context, the last article I chose is kind of I look at it as a satirical approach to Western Civ. And it's, as you'll see by the shelf behind me in my shirt, I'm kind of a NASA geek, wannabe engineer, if you will. But so I looked at this. Did NASA predict civilization's collapse? And it's by Ian Angus in the book A Redder Shade of Green. And in here, he speaks about an article. This is a fairly recent article, just a couple of years ago. And he talks about how there was an article that referenced a study by NASA's Goddard Space Center that civilization could collapse if we continue on this path of resource, unsustainable living and not shifting to renewable resources and all of that. And within a couple of days of this being posted, it went like wildfire. People are just all doom and gloom, and it gets caught up into more mass media outlets and all that. And really, uh, this guy took a look and he applied a mathematical approach to it to uh, dis, uh, disprove, I guess, the theory that this guy was putting forward based on that very general study that the NASA Center put out. But the point here that I think we need to get at is that we have to be careful about what we're looking, what we're teaching, and how we look at it, because the cultures and the generations of today don't look at things the same as the last generation or the next generation. And we have to keep this in mind when we're talking about Western Civ and how that applies to us as a people and a society. Thank you. I hope you have a great weekend. Happy 4th of July, and stay safe. Bye bye.